There are moments in life that split your world into two halves, before and after. For me, that moment came on a quiet Tuesday morning, when I opened a brown envelope that wasn't even addressed to me. My name is Amara. I grew up believing that family meant safety. That blood meant loyalty. That the people who kissed your forehead goodnight would never, could never, be the ones to destroy you. I was wrong. I was 26 when my grandmother passed. She was the kind of woman who smelled like jasmine and old books, who pressed folded prayers into your palms, and told you that God never forgot the ones who suffered quietly. She left behind a house, a modest brick property in the town where I was born, and a will that named me as the sole heir. I didn't know about the will until after she was gone. No one told me. My parents, my aunts, my uncles, they all stood around her grave with their handkerchiefs and their grief, and not one of them looked me in the eye. I should have noticed that. I should have asked questions sooner. But I was grieving. And grief has a way of making you trust the people around you, because you think, surely, not now. Surely, not while we're all still hurting. The property is being handled, my father told me one evening, his voice steady as stone. You don't need to worry about any of it. We'll sort it out as a family. I nodded. I believed him. He was my father. 6 weeks after the funeral, I came home to visit. Something felt different, quieter, heavier. My mother kept busy in the kitchen. My father sat in his chair with the television on, but his eyes weren't watching it. I wandered into the study, the room where my grandmother used to write letters, and that's when I saw it. A brown envelope, half tucked under a stack of old newspapers. The word "sold" was stamped across it in thick red ink. And something cold moved through me. Something that wasn't grief anymore. I slipped the envelope into my bag before anyone could see me. I walked back to the kitchen, sat down at the table and smiled, because I had learned in that moment that I needed to be very, very careful. What I found inside that envelope that night would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. But what they didn't know, what they had completely forgotten, was that my grandmother had trusted me with something long before she ever got sick. She had handed me a document. A second document. And she had whispered, "Keep this, my love. Keep it somewhere only you will find it. I pray you never need it, but if you do, it will speak for both of us." I had kept it. Tucked away, sealed in a plain envelope at the back of my wardrobe. I had almost forgotten it existed. Almost. That night, alone in my flat, I spread the contents of the envelope across my kitchen table. There were documents, a sale agreement, a transfer of title, signatures, and at the bottom, the price. My grandmother's home, the one she had spent 40 years building, the one where I had learned to read, and where I had cried after my first heartbreak, sold for far less than it was worth, and every penny received by my parents. My name was nowhere on those papers. Not once. I sat with that truth for a long time. I didn't cry immediately, that surprised me. I just sat there, reading the same lines over and over, trying to find a different way to understand them. But there was no other way. My parents had found the will, hidden it, forged a consent signature, mine, and sold a property that legally belonged to me. They had erased me from my own inheritance. Quietly. Efficiently. Like I was nothing more than a small inconvenience. The grief hit me later, at 2 in the morning. Not grief for the property, grief for the version of my parents I had carried inside me my whole life. The version that loved me simply and completely. That version didn't exist. Maybe it never had. But pain, I have learned, is not the end of the story. It is just the beginning of a different kind of strength. I thought about confronting them. I imagined walking into that living room, throwing those papers on the table, watching their faces fall. Part of me wanted to see that, wanted them to feel even a fraction of what I felt in that moment. But I stopped myself. Because anger is loud, and loud things lose. I had something better than anger. I had evidence. And I had my grandmother's second document. I pulled out the plain white envelope from behind a stack of old university folders. Inside was a handwritten letter from my grandmother, signed and witnessed by her solicitor, a letter that clearly named me as the rightful heir, and included a legal clause she had specifically added to protect against any unauthorized sale. She had known. Somehow, she had known this could happen. And she had prepared for it. "They will try," she had written, in her careful, slanted handwriting. "People always try when they smell inheritance. But this paper is your shield, my darling. Do not let them take what is yours." I pressed that letter to my chest and I wept, not from sadness, but from something that felt like being held. Like she was still here, still protecting me. I made an appointment with a solicitor the very next morning. I walked in carrying both envelopes, theirs and hers, and I laid everything on the table. The solicitor looked at the documents carefully. Then he looked at me. "This clause," he said slowly, "makes the sale legally void. The property was never theirs to sell." And just like that, the walls they had built around my silence began to crack. The legal process was not fast. It was not clean. There were letters and meetings, and one very tense afternoon where my parents sat across from my solicitor and tried to explain themselves. My father said it was a misunderstanding. My mother cried. And I sat very still, with my hands folded in my lap, and I said nothing, because everything that needed to be said was already written down. The sale was declared void. The buyers were reimbursed by my parents from their own savings. The property was returned to the estate, and the estate was returned to me. I won't pretend that felt like victory. It didn't. Victory would have meant my grandmother was still alive. Victory would have meant a family that didn't need to be fought in a courtroom. What it felt like was justice. Quiet, exhausting, bittersweet justice. My parents tried to reach out afterward. My father wrote a long letter explaining debts, desperation, plans to repay me one day. My mother called and said she hoped I could understand. I read every message. I listened to every voicemail. And then I chose, very deliberately, to protect my peace. Not every door that closes deserves to be reopened. Not every wound deserves to be left where it can be touched again. I kept my grandmother's house. I had it repainted, white walls, the same jasmine climbing up the front fence. I go there sometimes, on quiet mornings, and sit in the room where she used to write her letters. And I think about what she knew, that love without integrity is just performance. That family is not a guarantee of safety. That a woman who knows her worth, and has the papers to prove it, cannot be erased. If there is one thing I want you to take from this story, it is this: she was right. Keep the document. Keep the evidence. Keep the truth, because the people closest to you will sometimes be the ones who bet against you. And when that day comes, the quietest woman in the room, the one who said nothing, who sat very still with her hands folded in her lap, will be the one still standing when the dust settles. My grandmother didn't just leave me a house. She left me a lesson. And I will carry it for the rest of my life.